Going into my senior year, we lost a fellow student in a car accident. Pretty intense situation. I knew the girl named Taylor and had seen her in the hall only a few weeks before and said hi. We were never great friends, but we had a few mutual friends and had spoken recently on chat about the guy we both knew named Eric, who was a few years older than us. After Taylor passed away so tragically, and a lot of hurt was seeping into our community, the mutual friend was devastated at the news and met with her family for the first time after her death. I'll start with lucid dreaming daily and have a very good idea of what's happening in my dreams as they occur. Scarier than you might think. Taylor came to me in a dream one night. I was looking at her from across desks when we never had a class together. I said, "Taylor, why are you here? You shouldn't be here." In my dream, my friend Jade turned around and said, "Who are you talking to?" Taylor disappeared before I could point out that she was clearly there. All of a sudden, I was in this local graveyard beneath this tree on a hill with her. She just kept repeating in sobs, "I'm so scared. I'm so cold. I don't know why I'm here. Please help me. I want my mom. I want to go home." All I could do was try to get words out to comfort her or something, but nothing came of it, and I woke up. There was a service a few weeks later where the majority of our school attended. She was driven away in a hearse with a family behind for a private burial in the local cemetery. I caught up with our friend Eric at the service, and he said they locked the most beautiful spot for her, on a hill, under the tree. I had no way of knowing that I had dreamt of Taylor a few weeks prior to it. To this day, it seems so real when she came to me in my dream. That was really crying out for help to one of the few people that may have been able to hear her. I've had a few crazy experiences with paranormal happenings, and I'm happy to share them. But it's always a somber feeling when I realise they aren't made up, that the fear I felt through every experience was real. The people around me felt real fear. There's so much more to this world. We'll never know. I was 13 and I was sleeping at my friend's house down the block. It was night time and my friend's brother went to an abandoned psychiatric centre and told us about some stuff that supposedly happened to him and his friends. He told us they couldn't leave the way they entered for whatever reason, so he and his friends ran to the other side of the building, and as they passed each room, the light inside would turn on. Crazy shit. Probably bullshit, but some crazy shit happened later. We were playing video games. There was this light next to my friend's futon that was flickering. It was around 10 p.m. One of us said something to the effect of, "Stop doing that," to the light as a joke. But the light did stop flickering. It stayed on, and it hadn't since we switched the light on. Then we told it to stop flickering again, which it did. This is nothing crazy, but it definitely caught our attention. But eventually, we started asking it to turn on and off in specific patterns, which it started to do. Stay off 5 seconds, blink 3 times, stay on for 5 seconds, and blink 7 times, and stay off for 8 seconds. Stuff like that. We would usually begin and end the patterns by staying on or off for a certain amount of time. Then it would go back to basically being on and flickering. But then we would start a pattern and it would stop flickering, then either stay on or off for however many seconds we said, and then light up and turn off in even steady intervals to show our patterns. Then go back to flickering. It wasn't natural. It was like someone was turning on and off with a switch, but it wasn't connected to a switch on the wall. It was like a novelty beer glass with a light in it. Not a regular lamp like you're picturing. Its on and off switch was one of those wheel things along the cable of the plug. There was no way to turn it on and off remotely, and it did these patterns perfectly. Me and my friend continued to tell this light to perform patterns by lighting up and turning off. We did this for hours. I cannot emphasize enough that it did not mess up once. It was never just close enough. If we told it to stay on, it would stop flickering and stay on and work properly until we told it to do something else. Or it would stay totally off if we told it to. It would stay on or off for any amount of time we asked, even minutes at a time. Like we could tell it to turn off and come back on at a certain time, or vice versa. It would do exactly what we said as soon as we said it. It was just impossible to be that accurate by chance. It was perfect, every time, for hours. These patterns got more and more complicated, and as long as we continued to do this, and not once did it perform the exact pattern we dictated. But one particular thing I remember is me telling it to blink 300 times. And then it started rapid fire blinking super fast. Way faster than it had the whole night prior. And as I was watching it blink at super speed, I said stop. And the millisecond that that word came out of my mouth, it stopped. Wasn't complicated, but it was unique. We didn't ask it to blink that many times in a row before, and when we did, it just took off. Then I stopped immediately after I said stop. Like, this shit was mind-blowing, but it was really happening. We had to make sure that his brother hadn't found a way to mess with us through the night, but we couldn't figure out how. The same outlet that the light was plugged into had an alarm clock plugged in as well, which was acting totally normal. So we knew he wasn't messing with the circuit breaker or anything like that, because you can't control that one single plug in an outlet from his circuit breaker. His neighbour was also a cop, so we wondered if maybe his son had found some sort of equipment that we didn't know about and was somehow using it to control the light remotely while listening to us. Even though the TV and AC were on and we were speaking pretty softly, so it would be hard to hear us clearly through the extra noise if someone was using some sort of device. But we were just basically running everything through. We had plenty of time to troubleshoot this shit. It went on all night. So in order to rule this stuff out, we decided to ask the light questions. Questions it could answer via lighting up and turning off, basically. And questions we knew his brother or his neighbour or anybody really didn't know the answers to. I have a huge family, so I had distant members of his family I didn't know, and a lot of questions to ask. This was essentially, I'm thinking of a number, and it would steadily light up and turn off the number of times in my head, then go back to flickering. I asked questions I knew no one in his family or his neighbours knew, and my friend asked questions about people I've never heard of, and I'm sure my family hadn't. In case someone from my house was outside my friend's house to mess with us and answering the questions. I would ask a million questions just like that, to the number in my head each and every single time. My friend said the answers to his questions were correct too. It could have been his brother or anyone else messing with the lights. They didn't know any of my cousins or anything like that. Realistically, no one would have been able to hear us anyway. We were purposefully being very quiet and had the TV pretty loud and the AC was on. The only person it could have been was my friend next to me, but we were holding hands the whole night. Most of the time, all four hands were involved, so he wasn't controlling anything without my knowledge, and I knew he didn't know the name of my uncle that died as an infant, and other random stuff. Eventually, we saw no other way. There was actually something in that room next to us, and we were openly communicating with it. We never held a seance or anything like that, it just showed up. We were getting scared though. I remember we were holding hands super tightly, but once we decided this has to be some crazy shit, we asked it questions about itself. Again, questions it could answer numerically, or yes or no. It was pattern A for yes, pattern B for no kind of thing. What I remember it saying is that it's a human that had died. It was a he. He was black and was aged 13 when he died, and that he had been a patient at Pilgrim State Psychiatric Centre near my town before it had shut down, the one my friend's brother went to. But who knows if that's true? If it can communicate, it can lie. Maybe it was an alien. Seemed like it could read minds, or it actually just had knowledge about our families. It said God and the devil are real. I don't remember everything we asked for, just random things like asking if it was the same ghost that visited any of my siblings, because they had some weird stories. It said no. We asked if he knew who had haunted them. Said yes. We asked if it would come back. Said no. We asked if it wanted to hurt us, and it said yes. It also said it was going to kill us when we asked, and when we asked if it was going to kill us that night, it said yes. It did not, however. We were definitely scared, but after a while, it still hadn't killed us. Like me and my friend were holding hands, and our other hands on top of our held hands. So it was like we were holding all four hands in a big bundle. Towards the end, it hadn't killed us yet, so we began inquiring as to how it might kill us. Like, Were the syringes with something deadly in our shoes? Or was it going to poison our milk and our cereal? If it would kill us after we opened the door, it said yes to every way of killing us, if I recall. Eventually, around 6 a.m., I remember just going and unplugging the light. We didn't want to before that, not sure why. Maybe because this was the craziest thing ever, and we weren't sure if unplugging it would make it just stop. But it was also threatening to kill us, so eventually we did. It was early in the morning by that time anyway. Nothing continued after it was unplugged. We went and had breakfast with his father, who didn't believe us. That was just that. Nobody believed us, and life went on. I'm in the military, separated from my spouse, but not divorced, so I'm still allowed to live in a house. I don't like living alone, so I invited my friends, Kevin and Lola, to stay with me, especially since money was tight after my husband left. Earlier this year, 2019, my housemate Kevin went on leave to visit his girlfriend and brought back a ghost that had been with her. At first I was pissed, because I used to be absolutely terrified of any ghost, nice or not. At first nothing happened. I was happy about that, but then everyone, myself, roommate, guests, would hear shuffling and footsteps when everyone was asleep or no one was home. At first it freaked me out, but we all laughed about it when Kevin told us that the ghost started bringing him cans of Coke in the middle of the night. And we decided to give the ghost a name. George. George kept up with the footsteps and shuffling, but there still wasn't any definitive proof of his existence. Until one night, 4 of us, Kevin, Lizabelle, Lola and I, were drinking beer around the edge of the bar counter in the kitchen. On the other end of the bar, against the wall, around 6 feet away, were 3 wine bottles and a plastic water bottle that had been sitting there untouched and unmoved for months. We all got louder and louder, talking excitedly over each other until we were yelling. At that point, the water bottle, that had been unfazed by anything for months, flew off the counter. We were all facing in its general direction, but too far to touch it. No one had hit the counter or anything. Well, and also it didn't fall. I mean, it flew across from the kitchen to the dining room, landing about 15 to 20 feet away. We all watched it happen and were in shock. I picked up the water bottle and we concluded that George does not like loud noises. About a month later, I was home early from work and everyone was still gone. I was in my room getting dressed for my college class when I heard movement in the kitchen. Shuffling. The sounds of plates and cups being moved, as if someone was doing the dishes. But I hadn't heard anyone unlock or open the front door. And my housemates had already texted me, saying they wouldn't be home for a few hours. I grabbed the revolver and cleared every room in the house out of fear that someone had broken in. When I determined I was alone, I said to the empty dining room, "Oh, George, it's just you. You scare the living shit out of me. I thought someone had broken in. Next time, just let me know it's you." He never did let me know if he was going to be making noise, though. He exists on his own terms. Time passed. We kept working. We kept drinking. George kept shuffling, but nothing new. In July, Beatrice and her daughter Elsa moved in, and her girlfriend Zelda. Our friend Mikey and Lizabelle started staying over more often. Lizabelle said she heard George every single time she stayed over. By August, they were there almost every single night. One night, when Kevin left his room in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom while everyone was asleep, he saw the black figure of a man standing at the bar. He simply said, "What's up, George?" and went about his business. Another night, when Lizabelle had fallen asleep on the couch, she woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of movement in the corner of the living room. She turned over to see what had made the noise, and she saw the black figure of a man standing in that corner. She said, "Hi, George," rolled over, and went back to sleep. Toward the end of August, Kevin was discharged from the military and went back to his home state. No one in the house heard or saw George after he left, and Kevin said he hadn't heard or seen him either. We didn't know where George had gone. We were sad. A few weeks ago, at the end of October, Kevin came back to the house to gather the last of his belongings and visit. Still, no sign of George. The week between Kevin leaving once again and everyone moving out on November 1st, George made himself known again. Once, when Lola was in the house alone, he turned on a water faucet. And the second time, he did the same to Beatrice. Now Kevin is in his home state. Beatrice, Zelda, and Lola moved to another home. Vinny and Lola are back in the barracks, and I'm travelling across the country to my home state now that I've been discharged as well. We don't know where George is now, if he left with someone or stayed in the house, but we anxiously await for him to make his presence known. Before we all got married, my husband and I and his brother and now wife lived together in a single family house. Here are some things we experienced. When I'd worked from home alone, I'd always feel someone watching me. Not an uncommon feeling. I know, but this quickly grew to be more imposing. One corner of my room would have a darkness about it, both in presence and physically. I always felt like something was coming from that corner, looking at me or something. I'd wake up at night and find myself always drawn to that corner. I have no idea why that area was so much darker than the rest of the room, when in reality, it should have been about as evenly lit. Anyways, one night, I was sleeping and felt myself in what I can only now describe as some kind of paralysis state. My eyes were closed, but I was aware. I swear something screamed right in my face, like as if a grown man was directly over me. I sat straight up, scared out of my mind, which scared my husband awake. Just told him I had a bad dream, and we went back to sleep. About a week later, my husband sat straight up in bed, turned to me and said, "I swear someone just yelled in my face. Still gives me chills." Then, the other major occurrence. One night, I woke up from a sound downstairs. My husband didn't wake up from the noise, so I got up and opened the bedroom door. As soon as I did, so did my brother-in-law. At that exact same moment, we opened our bedroom doors to each other and agreed we both heard something downstairs. His wife didn't wake from the noise either. We both listened and heard footsteps and light shuffling. At this point, we wake up our spouses, lock ourselves in a room and call 911. The police come and find no one else in the house and nothing missing. We had a ton of valuables out and easy to grab had someone broke in. They do inform us that our basement was trashed. The strange thing is we only have storage boxes down there and we basically never went down there. The bulkhead to the house outside was locked, as well as the door leading into the basement from the inside the house. The storage boxes were thrown all around, but again, nothing missing. We moved out a couple of months later. After the fact, we found out that the house was a new construction built over a multi-family house that burned down. Not sure if there were any deaths associated with that. My in-laws used to live in an old two-family house, separated from a graveyard by a tall stone wall. The house as well as the graveyard date back to the 1800s. The graveyard might be even older. I live in New England, so we have lots of old places like this. Picture old, crumbling tombstones that are so worn you can barely make out the inscriptions. The day they move in, we walk through the house. First floor is not too exciting. Upstairs, not too bad. But that attic. The attic was equipped with a chain lock, kind you might have bolted to your door frame to supplement the handle lock and deadbolt. It seemed unnecessary, but we didn't think much of it. 4 of us ventured up the stairs, one after the other. I was the second one in line. The attic was separated in 2 parts. The right half was a miniature room, and I mean miniature. Small walls that didn't reach up to the ceiling, a tiny window and a tiny door. The left half was an open loft. In the centre of the loft was a single broken rocking chair. As I looked over towards the chair, I swear a white ball of light flew past my head, almost hitting me. It went right for the open space around the chair and vanished. No one else saw, and I kept my mouth shut in fear of everyone else panicking and us all falling down the stairs. My father-in-law talks about how he plans to get rid of the chair to use space for storage. At the same time, my sister-in-law blurted out to never touch the chair. We leave the attic, and I try to put what I saw out of my mind. Over time, other strange things started happening. My brother-in-law was around 8 at the time. One day, we went into his room and found out that he had drawn crosses all over his wall, all the way around the room. He didn't know much about religion at the time, so it was really freaky. He said they were for protection. We asked what, and being a kid, he didn't really explain. He talked about the people who played cards in my sister-in-law's bedroom. He told us all their names and what their old-fashioned clothes looked like. He said we shouldn't be scared because they wouldn't bother us. He would bring them up by name every once in a while. This obviously freaked out my sister-in-law immensely. Her room was the room directly next to the attic door and facing the graveyard. My brother-in-law would also talk about the shadow people who would stand behind him in the mirror. This creeped me out. He said they were not the same as the card players and they travelled with him. He decided to talk to me about this in the middle of the night while it was just the two of us at my house. It's as scary as fuck. One day, I went to visit and went straight up to my sister-in-law's room. As I passed the attic door, I noticed it was cracked open, just as much as the chain lock allowed. It was pitch dark in there, but a pair of eyes looked back at me. I figured my sister-in-law was playing a trick on me, even though she hated the attic too. I said something like, haha, very funny. You know I didn't like the attic. Stop playing around. I was angry and a little freaked out. I went downstairs to complain about how she was messing with me. My mother-in-law assured me that she had been at work for hours. No one else was home. Let's just say my visit was cut short that day. Another time, I was using the bathroom upstairs. As I went to grab the door handle to exit, it started violently shaking. Terrified, I opened the door and no one was there. If someone tried to play a trick and run away, I would have heard them run down the creaky stairs and all of the rooms were open and empty. I never went upstairs alone after that. Here's the part that still gets me. My sister-in-law was at a friend's house. Her friend's mother had a medium over for a party. It was a basic reading room party. At one point, the medium, who never met my sister-in-law before, pulled her aside. She said, I want you to know you're right. Tell your dad you're not crazy. You shouldn't touch that rocking chair. First experience was when I was about 10, laying on the top bunk, back against the bars, and felt a heavy poke on my back. Then the room went icy cold. I just lay there terrified and awake. Nothing came after that, really. We then moved to a flat once my parents divorced. My mum experienced people calling her name in this flat, where her master found out someone had hung himself there years before. My friend came to stay over once too, but went home because something freaked him out when he went to the toilet, and he's never told me what it was. Again, when I was about 14 to 16 years old, we lived in an end terrace council house, and every so often, I'd wake up. But when I'd wake up, the room would be black. I mean, absolute darkness. And I'd see the outline of what I'd imagine was a man at the end of my bed staring over me. The real fun started when I bought my first house with my ex. I'll cut the bull and get to the business. One night, I was out visiting my mum when I got a call. Get home. Something has fallen downstairs and I'm not going down until you get home. Ever the believer, but not one to scare people, I get home and see what the score is. She said it sounded like a marble bounced around on the tiles downstairs, when we never had marbles, and nothing to fall and resemble the sound or anything. Anyway, we find nothing, so we potter about. Until later that evening. She decides she's off to bed. I'm in the kitchen with the dog when I hear her gasp in shock and see her backing down the stairs really slowly. She bursts into tears and tells me that something knocked the door and wall of the spare room at her as she got to the top of the stairs. She comes to me in the kitchen where we had a dining room with a sofa where the doggo would chill. When all of a sudden, the dog goes berserk. I mean, she goes nuts, but whimpering too. She's scared, not backing down from whatever is in our kitchen. The kitchen, I shit you not, visibly gets darker and darker and darker. My ex is then staring at me blankly, as if to say, what the fuck? I get up in an act of bravado, shitting my pants, to show there's nothing there. I get to the kitchen, icy cold, absolutely freezing, beyond anything you'd probably have in a house. I wave it off to say we're both exhausted. Maybe the heating is banging, just not to scare her. I know what's going on. Before bed, I had to get the washing in, and I had a tiered garden, about 3 of them. So I had to get to the top of the garden to get the washing line down. I turned to look at the house. The 2 top windows are not covered by anything, no curtains or anything. The landing light is on, shedding a little light into the spare room. That's when I saw it. The thing that started fucking us about. It was in the far right corner, staring at me. Then it glided through the room into the landing area, into the bathroom. I see her downstairs in the kitchen with the dog. Then the shouts to get in. The fucking taps are on upstairs. I was petrified, but I was the man. I can't be scared. I shat my pants in all honesty each time I went home. Anyway, other stuff I won't delve into too much detail happened. The Xbox would turn on. TV channels would change randomly. Our washing on the chair would just fall off. It wouldn't fly, just fall unnaturally. The waste bin would be in the middle of the kitchen in the morning if we went out. It would happen too. But we'd hear it move if we were there at the time. Our cross trainer we had upstairs would start to rotate very gently, but it would do full 360 rotations. One evening, we sat watching TV. The dog was with us. We heard this almighty bang and almost an animal scratching above us, where our room was on the laminate flooring. Stuff would be pulled out of the cupboards, not stuff from the front, stuff from the back. The dog couldn't do that, surely. Our taps and showers would turn on, all the normal stuff from a ghoul, if you will. The in-laws dismissed it all and said we were imagining this stuff up when we're living through it. Unreal. One evening, though, that changed for them when they stayed over and witnessed the sugar jar fly off the counter and smash. Another time, my mum stayed with my brother for Christmas. What killed me about this is that my mum didn't want to sleep that night. She was too scared to sleep. Even my brother woke up a few times, the 2 of them not knowing what's in this house, making noises, keeping them awake, while I'm in bed. That made me feel really guilty. Anyway, that's the bulk of what happened, quite frequently too. We did have a medium come to the house to clear it, and it sort of worked. They basically said that there was a guy who committed suicide and he was just a horrific nuisance in life, a down and out. They said they cleared him off. My partner and I split up. Then, I got a panicked phone call at 3 a.m. Were you just in the house? No, I'm in bed. What's up? Someone just shook me and woke me up. I saw someone in the dining room, a big shadowy figure. Then I glided through the living room door. The baby gate started to shake really bad. Then I saw the door handle move rapidly. We'd been split up for about 2 months. We didn't finish on good terms. I knew how terrifying that must have been for her, so I got up there, picked her up, and took her to her friends. And that concludes the house saga. First of all, I cover work in 2 buildings. These include night shifts alone. One building is known to give people experiences, the other not so much, until about a few years back. The first building was opened in the 1930s. During the war, where I'm from was bombed pretty bad, as it was a main dock supplying the Navy, to supply the Army, etc. So the building was used as a mortuary for locals who perished. The place has a grand old hall and a crown court that's no longer in use. My first experience was seeing an orb on the CCTV. I thought it was just dust, but when it started prancing around, I knew it wasn't just dirt. A fly, maybe? Who knows? The next one was a while later, where I'd hear bangs in the building. I know it's old, but these weren't the heating systems kicking in noises. These were door slamming noises. One night on patrol, I went through a key code door. I go through the door, it closes. I take no more than 5 or 6 steps, and all of a sudden, it's beeping. Something has entered the exact code to release the door, but the door doesn't swing open. It's just the code has released the magnetic lock. I'm frozen to the spot with my torch and carrying on my patrol, because I have to. And now, I'm in the old court areas. I have to go through the old courtroom, past the dock area. Then I hear an almighty banging from down in the cell area. And no, I absolutely did not go down to check. My return back to the office resulted in a phone call to be told I'm suffering sleep deprivation. Another experience, looking up at the central block of the building at around 3 a.m., I noticed the lights coming on. These lights are on a sensor system. Could have been a fly, something falling, but I saw someone up there. It was definitely someone up there. Someone working late I didn't know about. So funny announcement. Nothing. I go to check. No one is there. Zilch. I log it and carry on my shift. Another night, I'm sitting at the desk. It's in the open of the reception area. The reception area is huge and grand steps up in the centre. I'm doing office work to catch up. There's this almighty bang on the desk, and I very nearly lose bowel control. I'm just sitting in absolute shock, as anyone would. Then I see something drifting into the top foyer area, just gliding past. I open the front doors and get some fresh air at this point. A few hours later, the corner of my eye catches my torch, very dimly lit, almost as if the batteries are on their last legs, like the torch is burning out. Problem here is my torch isn't on, and the batteries are brand new. Turns out, the spirit must have used so much energy creating the bang, it sapped my batteries for much energy. Can this happen, guys? The most recent was opening the gates. When you open the gates, you can see the frosted or misted windows in the cell area at the back of the courts. These are below the dock area, obviously. I open the gates around 7:30, turn and head back, and the sound of a bicycle coming into the yard makes me turn around. As I acknowledge the cyclist, I see someone in the cell area of the courts. I get back to the desk, ask my colleague who's in the courts. No one. He goes to check, nothing of note. Around 10 a.m, some guy comes in to do some work, ironically in the courts. We give him the keys, the badge and the codes. The guy comes back, sweating and almost as white as a sheet, and says he's signing the job off as a two-man job. We ask what's up, and he looks like he's about to cry. He says he'd go to one of the courtrooms where he was doing some work when he heard a shout from the cell area. So we went down to see if there was another contractor there. He then heard another shout going from the cell area where I'd seen the shadow. So he follows the noise. Then has horrific chest tightness and an anxiety attack. What he said then really shook us both. He said the first cell door was slightly ajar, and standing in the gap was a wide-eyed person staring him down. We never saw that same contractor again. That's pretty much that for that building. The other was built on the site of an 1800s monastery. This building is very quiet, but each time I go through this certain part, I get a tightness and mild anxiety. Nothing nasty. It doesn't feel dark, but it's something. I spoke to a medium friend who doesn't know me well enough to know where I work, let alone what it looks like in this particular area. When he reels off the decoration of the area, the particular part of the building, even the colour of the carpet, he then says a little girl follows me around the area because I make her feel safe from the others. I'm shitting my pants. So this little girl is following me around where I work at night. That explains the corner of my eye tiredness shadows of a kid running past. Anyway, I ask him to help her move on, as he does. I get the most amazing smell of flowers around me. Even my friend noticed this. Apparently, it's a thank you from her for looking after her and then helping her on. Not long back, some out-of-hours staff workers on the 3rd floor rang down in a panic. They always travel in twos to the toilets because they're scared of the building. They've rung and said there's a little girl on the 3rd floor hiding around a corner, and she keeps looking at them. I'd normally dismiss this, but I go check this out with them. I see nothing and go back to my office. Another night, they report they saw someone staring at them from the 3rd floor window whilst they were having a cigarette around 2 a.m. They're outside for about 15 minutes, then come to the office and ask if I saw them making jibes at me. When I tell them I've been here the whole time, their faces drop instantly. They didn't work the night shifts again after that. Experience number 1, the bonnet. So this happened when I was 1 year old and late at night. So I started to cry, so my mom came in to comfort me. As she was comforting me, a young girl appeared in the hallway. The girl was wearing a bonnet and old-looking clothes, and for some reason angry. The apparition then charged at my mom and dissipated. Keep in mind, My sister was not born at the time. Experience number 2. An old man. So I was older and was eating breakfast, getting ready for school, when I heard my mum and brother talking about seeing an old man taking a leisurely stroll down the hallway. Of course, I was confused about the ordeal since I hadn't seen anything, but it was still a cool experience to hear about. Experience number 3. Dread. So my brother was sleeping with the door to his room open when he suddenly felt a presence staring at him. So he opened his eyes and looked into the hallway where the girl with the bonnet was staring at him. Terrified, my brother froze in fear, in which the girl asked, "Hello?" I've kept my door closed since then. Experience number 4. Horror movie singing. This was a self-experience in which we, my family, were watching America's Funniest Home Videos. We all paused the show and took a restroom break, laundry sorting and a few other things. Me and my sister were the only ones in the living room, and only my sister could have sung it. It was the young girl in the horror movies that sang like Ring Around the Rosie, and my sister heard it too, who exclaimed it wasn't her who sung it. Just a month or 2 ago, she told me that while that happened, she saw the girl with the bonnet swinging on a swing in the hallway. Nightmare fuel. From these experiences alone, it caused me to believe in the paranormal. And to add insult to injury, my previous house owners saw the exact same spirits. In the 1980s, my grandparents bought a farm in Fairhill, New Zealand, not far from many of their other properties they had in the past. The house they lived in was, I'd say, an older home, but not really old. As soon as they moved in, my grandma said that things were instantly strange. The clocks would stop almost simultaneously, and their brand new washing machine would start for no apparent reason. These things can all be electrical issues for sure. I mean, they were living in an old homestead in the middle of nowhere. However, my gran awoke one night to see a lady dressed in Victorian-era clothing, and 2 children standing at the foot of a bed. Being religious, she said she prayed each night, and in a few days all signs stopped. She, however, was the only one to see this, even though her husband was sleeping in the same room. It wasn't until a week after that she spied the neighbour next door and decided to introduce herself. They got talking, and all of a sudden, mid-conversation, the lady asked, "Have you met the ghosts yet?" My grandma apparently nearly fainted hearing this confirmed. It wasn't just a vision. I'm not a firm believer in the paranormal. However, I believe my grandmother's recounting of what occurred. I am a tad stumped as to why Victorian-era people would be present at the property, where Grandma lived at the region wasn't inhabited till the 1850s. And that particular area was very remote, as it was Maori land for quite some time. My gran had always grown up in the church, so spiritual things were always around her. As a kid, she remembered her aunt warning her of the ghosts in her home, but I think that may have been something to get her in check. Another story is of her uncle's home in the marshlands. It had been in the same family for over 100 years and had 4 generations in it. Her uncle and aunt could never leave the home because when they'd return, the house would be wrecked due to the ghost that lived in the house. Why would a ghost that's related terrorize a family? This has been eating me up on the inside for a while, mainly because I'm curious as to what this was. For context, I'm 18 years old. So a few months ago, when I was in bed around 10:30 p.m, I had this weird experience. I remember it clearly. The hall light was on, my door was open, and a black figure was staring at me. This looked very human-like, but all I could see were its shoulders and head, with short, scraggly hair hanging in front. Basically, picture a male version of Samara from The Ring. Now at this point, I was still in bed pretending to sleep. I was wearing an eye mask that I could see underneath, which is how I even saw this thing. But the moment I looked at it, it quickly sprung back and shook my door without a noise. Now my door is creaky, and the handle makes a loud clicking sound when the door is closed. Neither of these things happened. I asked both my parents the next morning if either of them peeked in my room, both of which said no. I was a little weirded out, but simply brushed it off as nothing more than sleep paralysis, which does occasionally happen to me. The only difference is that in my normal sleep paralysis episodes, I hallucinate a tarantula crawling along wherever I'm looking at. Not a humanoid figure, but no biggie, right? Wrong. The next night, around the same time, I saw the figure peeking at my door again. This time, though, it was holding something. I couldn't make out exactly what it was since everything was blacked out, but it looked like a bottle. But when I looked at it this time, it didn't go away. Instead, I was able to move my arm and then it left, quietly shutting my door again. This pretty much told me it wasn't a sleep paralysis, since I could move. It hasn't happened again since, but lately I've been thinking about it again. I've been watching a lot of urban legend videos lately, but one regarding the boogeyman caught my attention. The description of the boogeyman was eerily similar to this figure. The only difference being the boogeyman wears a hooded cloak, and this thing didn't have one. Another thing is the boogeyman usually goes after their children, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm 18. Does anyone else here think it could have been the boogeyman, or something else? I'm not sure, and I still don't know. I'm just curious what the general consensus is. Apparently I attract benevolent spirits who rarely appear now. This just happened in October and was the first encounter I've had in the daytime. I was on vacation with my parents in Salamar, aka Witchy Town. For as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated with creepy and spooky things, especially the Salem witch trials. Hell, I even collect original pictures from the late 1800s and early 1900s. So when my parents gave me a choice of either Rhode Island or Salem for my high school graduation trip, I obviously chose a spooky town. To make it even better, we were there the week before Halloween. I meticulously planned this vacation out by the hour because I had so many places I wanted to go. One of the places on my itinerary was the Howard Street Cemetery. Originally, I wanted to go to the old Burying Point Cemetery, but it was closed for renovations. For those who aren't aware, the Howard Street Cemetery was reportedly the field where Giles Corey was pressed to death during the witch trials. Once we actually got to the cemetery, I was focused on taking pictures of all the gravestones I was attracted to. I tried to gravitate to the older and broken ones, as well as those covered by debris. If I find one like that, I'll usually brush away whatever is on it, because I feel like whoever is buried there deserves that little bit of courtesy. This day, I ended up doing that to a few graves before taking the pictures. But when my parents and I were about to leave, I felt something or someone grab my arm. I don't like being touched, for multiple reasons. As I was taking pictures, I noticed another woman walk into the cemetery, so I assumed it was her grabbing me. When I turned around, though, there was no one. Even the area surrounding the cemetery was vacant, except for the three of us. My parents were in front of me as well, and this grab came from behind, so it couldn't have been them. My mum asked if I was okay, and I explained what happened and told her I thought it was the woman who walked in earlier. She said she left a while ago. I was still confused as my mom was basically dragging me out of the cemetery because she doesn't mess with the occult or anything dealing with spirits. The grab wasn't even forceful or angry. It was more of a gentle grab, as if they wanted me to stay. I've been trying to come up with a theory to this, and right now I have two. One of the spirits roaming the cemetery was glad to have company and didn't want me to leave. Perhaps it was someone from a grave I brushed leaves off of who was thankful I respected their burying point. Maybe it was someone who was just glad to see another person taking interest and not using the cemetery as a drinking spot. Perhaps they liked that someone was appreciating the place. This one's a little more far-fetched, but my mum actually brought it up and it kind of makes sense to me. My favourite aunt died from cancer almost a decade ago, and her passing gutted me. I still think I got my artistic talent and affinity for creepy stuff from her. She loved anything related to witches. After she passed, my horrible waste of oxygen we call my uncle went against her dying wishes and scattered her ashes oceanside somewhere in Massachusetts instead of burying her. My mom brought up the idea that it could have been her gently grabbing me to let me know she was still here with me. Even if whatever spirit grabbed me wasn't her, the idea is still comforting, considering she never even got to see me go into middle school. I've always seen her as my guardian angel, so this was her that grabbed me in that cemetery. It makes a lot of sense to me. We were in a witchy town during her favourite month, supposedly not far from where her ashes were scattered. I don't know exactly what happened that day, but I know for a fact that grab felt like a hand, gently wrapped around my arm. And it definitely wasn't an angry spirit. When I was a kid, maybe around 5 years old, my country had a civil war. I lived in the capital, but even then it was mandatory for the city to shut off the power at night. I'm guessing because it was easier for them to trace any possible attacks that way. Anyways, they shut off the power that night, and as usual, my older cousin and my older sister lit up a candle and took to my parents' room to go play. They're both 4 years older than me, so they were already of age to recognise if there was any danger, and had been told what to do. To get under the bed if anything were to happen. On top of that, I had a full-grown Labrador who had just had puppies, so any little noise she would bark. Any little movement she was aware of. I remember there was always cats trying to snatch the puppies, but again, my dog named Peggy was super protective over her pups. And she would sleep in the backyard and would always bark and protect us. And the pups. However, that night was different. We were in the room just playing. I remember my older cousin was on top of the bed. My sister was next to the window, and I was standing on the floor right next to the bed in between both of them. We were just playing when my cousin asked if we could see that thing on the patio. I looked and couldn't see anything. Neither did my sister. At first, we couldn't see anything. It was already night, so there were no lights and there was a screen on the window to keep the mosquitoes out. Then my cousin asked again, and then we saw it. The best way I can describe it was there was no outline on the body. I couldn't see anything except for two eyes that were elongated upside-down triangles. A line resembling a mouth. But it was like TV static. It was glowing, and it was between green and blue. Maybe 5 feet tall. It got closer to the window, and it kind of bent down and smiled at my sister. By smiling, I'm saying the line that resembled the mouth got bigger. I'm still getting goosebumps thinking about this. What was my dog doing? She was always so protective, and she didn't make a single sound. That thing was standing right outside my window, and froze. It froze for what it was, I don't know how much time. It made eye contact with all three of us. I could see it moving its eyes and just stare. There was no communication, mentally or anything. What was it? My cousin eventually snapped out of it and grabbed my sister and mine and ran out of the room to tell my parents. My dad went outside and found nothing. Mind you, we were at war. So what was this thing? What could be so stupid to go to someone's backyard with a big dog in a country at war at night and just stare at us? It almost looked like a hologram. It was glowing. I could see the little dots glowing in its eyes and mouth. I couldn't sleep with my head facing the window. I would hide under the blankets for years. The weather down there is always like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I would almost die every night out of breath under the blanket, but too afraid to look at my window. I never felt any threat, but it was just too bizarre. I've never seen it since then. I'm 33 now. I've looked and researched as much as possible to see if anyone else has seen anything like it. If you have anything, please contact me. I have to figure out what this thing is, or why it was there. We had a tradition of going to see my grandfather every summer and spend some time in his cabin. The cabin by a lake and older than he is. My cousins drop by most years, and it's only the time I got to see them. The cabin is a load of fun for a child spending their carefree summer. We swam, fished, and got taught how to clean fish to cook. The one thing I disliked about the cabin was there was no indoor washroom. A shower set up outside. An outhouse a few steps into the woods was the worst thing about the cabin. I hated using the outhouse. Bugs always took over the inside, and I had an irrational fear of something reaching up to grab me if I sat down. We begged my grandfather to get indoor plumbing. He tried his best. So far, he only got a tub hooked up, but his water heater could only handle so much. We were banned from using it in the summer. The place really being barely held together. It would be cheaper to buy a new cabin than to renovate it. We still went every year, always forgetting the negatives until we finally arrived. Even my father complained about the outhouse, and he didn't complain about much. My grandfather also had a rack of hunting rifles and one shotgun. He taught all of us never to touch them and to respect the weapons. He left the cabinet they were inside locked, his guns unloaded, and the ammo hidden somewhere else in the cabin. He took no chances with the guns around a bunch of kids. He threatened to whip our ass if he ever saw us touching them and told us it was because he loved us and didn't want an accident to happen. I asked why he kept the guns. I didn't see him use them very often, aside from shooting a deer or two. I would see him go off into the woods while we swam with a rifle on his shoulder, but he normally never came back with some animal he shot. I didn't think he would kill something to waste leaving it behind, or did I think he was a bad shot? He may walk slowly, but his eyesight was better than ours. He always knew what might be going on. One time my cousin found a cigarette someone dropped near the corner store where we sometimes got ice cream snacks. He kept it hidden for a day. When he thought the coast was clear, he used one of the lighters for the fire pit. He didn't even take a drag before our grandfather came out yelling at him, scaring us all to death. With 3 kids crying, begging him not to tell our parents, he gave us mercy as long as we cleaned the boat we've been putting off all weekend. Overall, my grandfather was a scary man, hiding a kind centre. One night, after telling each other ghost stories to freak each other out, the worst happened. When everyone else was asleep, I badly needed to use the outhouse. I hated going out at night. It might only be a few steps, and yet it felt like a mile walk. Things croaked off in the woods, which were perfectly normal noises for a forest. When you're a kid, pumped up off of stories, those noises turned into killers and ghouls waiting to scoop you up. I went through the cabin to the back door, knowing I couldn't hold it until morning. There was a flashlight by the door. I turned it on, only to have it flicker off. It was the kid's job to make sure the flashlight had new batteries. Sometimes we switched them out to the good ones and the shared Game Boy for a few more hours of playtime. It finally came back to bite us. Since the full moon was out and I've taken the path 100 times before, I went on without the flashlight. I feared what my grandfather would do if I woke him up, trying to find new batteries. Slipping on my sandals, I went off in the backyard and down the short path to use the washroom. Hearing a noise, I looked over my shoulder and walked faster, hearing what might be looking at me in the dark. That was a mistake. Going without a flashlight and not paying attention to where I was going could have killed me that night. The longer I walked, the more afraid I got. It shouldn't take this long to get to the outhouse. Another crack of a twig made me jump. I no longer could hold it and needed to step off the path, to do my business and carry on. I hated going to the washroom out in the woods. At least it was quick and I was back on my way going the way I came. But was I? Nothing looked right. The trail appeared too overgrown. I didn't understand how I got so far off the path. In my mind, I went the right way the entire time and only got lost when I stepped aside. Fear nearly froze me on the spot. Forcing my body to move, I started down where I thought I came from, praying to find the path again. I called out for someone to come and get me. A sound came and I shut my mouth. Heart beating so hard it hurt. I looked around trying to see what was stalking a poor scared kid in the dark. Something flew at me. Wings flapping and a screeching cry made me snap. I ran screaming, trying to get away from the creature. Only when I stopped running and was very lost, I realised I just got scared by a bat. Just a normal, harmless bat. I wanted to cry. Unless someone noticed I wasn't in my sleeping bag when they woke up, for the outhouse as well, no one would know I was missing until morning. How long would it take until someone did notice? I skip breakfast pretty often. They might assume I might just be sleeping in. I didn't want to stay in the woods overnight. Having no other options or ideas of what to do while lost, I kept walking while trying to force back my tears. I'd forgotten it was best to stay in one spot while being lost in the woods. Just going deeper in them wasn't the best idea. I felt cold, scared, and getting eaten alive by bugs. My small heart nearly broke over the idea of being out there forever. Starving to death and no one ever knowing what happened. Thinking back to the books I've needed to read in school, I wondered if I could live out in the woods until they found me. If I found clean water and could figure out how to make a fire, I might be able to. The issue being, I've never actually started a fire without a lighter. I tried with sticks, but it took too long and we always gave up. Me and my cousins loved burning things and were impatient. There was always a lighter to use. I wanted to try and find the cabin until the sun rose. If I was still in the woods by tomorrow night, I would buckle down to figure out how to make a fire. Wait, wouldn't someone smell the smoke and find me sooner? Or would I burn the entire forest down? Getting motivated, I started to look for a clearing I could use for a fire pit. It took a while, but I found a spot where the ground looked to be mostly dirt. It took longer to find a stone I could use to start digging out a hole in the dirt for my fire pit. My hands were cold and the rock cut into my fingers a few times. Then I needed to find the right sticks and kindling to get the fire started. And then finally get enough wood to keep it going if I did get one started. I didn't go out of sight of the clearing as I collected what I needed to. Exhausted by the time I thought I was ready, my pit was filled with dry leaves and small sticks. Larger sticks on the side, I sat down ready to try and get a fire started. I used 2 sticks. I peeled the bark off first. My hands became raw from rubbing them together. Frustrated, I didn't think I could get them warm enough from the friction to get anything started. I then tried the rock method. I didn't know if any rocks would do, or if my grandfather had a special type in his fire starting kit. A miracle of the night happened when I found the right rocks to smash together. One spark caught and I nearly fainted when the leaves burned and yet didn't catch fire. I kept trying until I had a very small flame I fed with my breath. I've never been so proud of myself in my entire lifetime. The smoke blew into my face, causing me to cough and my eyes water. Still very happy for my very small fire. There wasn't a way to tell how long I was out there for. The sun hadn't risen yet, so at least a few hours. As I warmed myself by the flames, I heard something off in the distance of the woods. Straining, I heard it again. My chest tightened with hope when I recognized they were human voices. No one I knew, but still someone out here in the woods with me. With my fire still going, I would be able to see my way back to the clearing if needed. I hurried off towards the voices, so happy I couldn't speak. Mine. Mine. The voices were a warning for the person they were speaking with. It sounded odd, as if English wasn't the first language. Still, it was someone who could help. And that's at least what I thought. Rushing into another clearing, all my excitement faded when I saw what belonged to those voices. A dead, torn to pieces deer sat in the middle of the small clearing. Blood soaking the grass and leaves. In the clear moonlight, I saw 3 pale figures all hunched over the deer, tearing in with their hands and teeth. All their limbs were skinny and far too long for their bodies. Each was pushing aside each other, trying to eat as much of deer as they could. Skin pale and drawn tight against their bones. Faces covered with blood. Each bald, with a mouth far too large for their face. And their eyes, oh God, their eyes were missing. Each with black, empty sockets. None noticed me until I let out a scream. All 3 heads darted up, now knowing there was fresh prey. I turned heel to run. Sounds from behind me said they were all starting to chase me. Tears came to my eyes, making it nearly impossible to see where I was going. I slammed into a tree hard enough to hit my arm to the point I thought it was broken. I tumbled to the ground, crying in pain. My moment of weakness is enough for one creature to get on top, limbs on either side. The head looked around trying to hear where I was. The large mouth opened, dripping blood on my tear-stained face. The moment before the mouth filled with teeth tore my face off, a loud cracking sound echoed through the forest. The creature blew off, head exploding in a burst of gore. I screamed more when a powerful hand grabbed my shoulder to drag me to my feet. "Grandpa?" I choked up when I saw him clearly through my wet eyes. He was holding his shotgun, ready to fire again, his face stern. Not afraid or surprised at the creatures. I expected them to attack us. They somehow knew what the gun could do. Grabbing their dead, they dragged it deeper into the darkness. The moment they were out of sight, I heard the worst noise. Awful sounds of bones cracking and breaking. They were eating the one my grandfather shot. It was all too much for me. I broke down sobbing. My grandfather silently bent over to pick up the sobbing child in one arm as he carried me through the woods. He stomped out my small fire on the way out. He didn't scold me for crying or getting lost. Him comforting me that night was the kindest moment we ever shared together. We arrived back by the time the sun was rising. My mother and father were awake and worried out of their minds. They scooped me up when we arrived and I cried all over again. Before we left, I was able to get my grandfather alone to ask him what happened. Those things wouldn't bother us at the cabin. I only saw them because I went too far into the woods. He had a deal with them that they were not to touch any humans as long as he fed them. He also wasn't sure how many of them lived in the woods or what they were. He fully understood if I didn't want to come back to the cabin next year. I almost didn't, until he passed away of natural causes. I spent parts of my summer at the cabin. He wasn't able to get an indoor toilet, but he did mark the path to the outhouse with those solar-charged lamps people used in their gardens to make sure no one ever went off the path again.